I'm going to go over the autonomic nervous system. It should help quite a bit here on understanding some of the medicines that we will be going over. Okay, so we have the sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight. The parasympathetic is the rest or digest. The neurotransmitter for the sympathetic nervous system is epinephrine. It's also called adrenaline, right? And we have norepinephrine there too. The parasympathetic nervous system, the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. Now, when I'm talking about neurotransmitters, what a neurotransmitter is it's the chemical required to transmit an impulse from one nerve to another nerve, or from one nerve to the effector organ, like the heart, right? So it has to have it needs that neurotransmitter in order to transmit that impulse. Now we got receptors. And what are receptors? Receptors are the spot, like let's say the adrenergic, which means adrenaline, right, which means it's from the sympathetic. The adrenergic receptors on the heart are what needs to be stimulated by adrenaline or epinephrine, whatever. So the adrenergic receptor on the heart is what will be stimulated by epinephrine to make the heart beat faster, right, because the sympathetic response is for the heart to beat faster. So that is what the receptor site is for, right? It's the area that receives the neurotransmitter, and the neurotransmitter attaches, right? It has to fit right. So epinephrine fits right onto all of your adrenergic receptors. Adrenergic receptors are all of the receptors within the sympathetic nervous system. So let's take a look and see what kind of adrenergic receptors we have. We have alpha-1 receptors and alpha-2 receptors. We have beta-1 receptors and beta-2 receptors. And there are some more out there, but these are the ones that we're going to be dealing with. Let's go over and look at the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the rest and digest portion of the autonomic nervous system. The neurotransmitter, like I said, is acetylcholine. The receptors are cholinergic receptors. You have muscarinic 1, 2, and 3, and nicotinic receptors. I'm not even going to talk about the subtypes over here. I'm just going to talk about cholinergic receptors all in one. We can't really do that over here because in the sympathetic side we really get very specific in some of these, and there's a lot of meds that we will talk about over here. So when you look at the responses that happen when something stresses you, that's like I always say, when the bear comes through the door and it really scares me, and I need to run from the bear, or I need to fight the bear, right? I need all the energy I can get. The sympathetic nervous system will end up overpowering the parasympathetic, right? We don't need to rest and digest now. We need to fight or flight, right? So, and when that happens, the epinephrine is released. Epinephrine starts getting released all over in all of these neurotransmitter sites. What is important is that you understand that when this happens, these are the responses that take place. So let's do this. I've got this set up here from head to toe. So we start up at the head. The eyes and the pupils, they'll dilate. They open up, right? If it happens to be kind of dark and the bear comes through the door, boom, you want to take off running. You don't want to miss that log on the ground. You want to see everything. So those things just dilate and let in as much light as possible. So the pupils respond to epinephrine by dilating. And they have A1 receptors on them. And when I talk about receptors, you got to think about what I'm talking about. Epinephrine will stimulate all of these receptors, right? Epinephrine will fit into all of these adrenergic receptors, but the medicines that we make won't. We found out that there's little variations in them, and we can make a medicine that will fit in one type, a receptor in an alpha receptor, or an adrenergic receptor in The eye is made a little bit different than the adrenergic receptor in the heart, and we take advantage of that fact by making medicines that will be selective and will attach to one but not the other. Whereas epinephrine fits in all of them, we have found little variations in the adrenergic receptors that we take advantage of to make a drug more specific than what the epinephrine is. That way we can stimulate parts of the sympathetic nervous system, but not necessarily all of it. So we've decided here that the pupil will dilate when epinephrine is released. So the sympathetics kick in, the bear came, it scared me, the sympathetics kick in, and the pupils will dilate. The salivary glands decrease secretion, right? We don't need any of the digestive juices, including saliva. We don't need that when we're running from the bear, right? So they are decreased. Bronchodilation. We need more oxygen, right? We are going to be running from the bear. We need more oxygen to come in. The bronchos dilate so we can inhale more air with each respiration. And that is done with the beta 2 receptor. Epinephrine is released, beta 2 is right here, and it will stimulate beta 2 receptor. And increase in heart rate and force of contraction, right? So we're working our way down from the head all the way down. So we're in the chest now. The bronchodilation and an increase in heart rate, and our heart is going to beat harder. So our heart is beating faster and harder, and beta 1 is responsible for that. Vasodilate the cardiac and pulmonic blood vessels, right? So the heart needs more blood supply because it's beating faster and it's using more oxygen. So it's going to need a more blood supply. So we're getting vasodilation of your coronary arteries. And then pulmonic blood vessels. Well, if you're breathing faster and bringing in more air to oxygenate, we need the blood going through there to pick it up. We're going to need an increase in perfusion of the lungs in order to pick up all of that extra oxygen that we're taking in. Vasoconstrict vessels in the skin. We don't need a large blood supply in our skin right now. We need it in our muscles, we need it in our heart and in our lungs. That's where we need the blood supply. So by vasoconstricting the skin, right, we're scared, we look white as a ghost. That's what happens. That's why we look white as a ghost, because all of the blood has been shunted away from the skin and in towards the core where we're going to need it. We inhibit digested and intestinal blood flow. We do not need to be digesting our food right now. We're running away from a bear, right? I'm not worried about digesting our food. We do not need the intestinal blood flow, right? All of that exchange of nutrients and stuff in the intestine doesn't need to take place. Shunt all of that blood away. A huge amount of our blood is going to our intestines when we are in rest and digest phase. We don't need that right now because we're in fight or flight phase. So the next one, liver. We stimulate the liver to release glucose. If we're going to do all of this running and we're going to do all of this stuff, increased action, we're going to need the glucose in order to make that happen, because that's what our cells do. They burn glucose for all of that energy. So liver is going to stimulate. We're going to raise our blood sugar here. Adrenal gland stimulates the release of epinephrine. So we need more epinephrine out there, right, to enhance all of this sympathetic activity. And the kidneys release renin. Remember when we talked about the RAAS, the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and we said one of the triggers for it was the fight or flight, right? We said was a sympathetic response was one of the triggers for it. We need to increase our pressure. We need to increase perfusion. So renin will do that. It increases our volume. Increase anal tone, right? Well, yeah, we don't really want to, we want to be able to hold everything back a lot easier, right? Oh, and we got the bladder. Relaxes the bladder and increases bladder sphincter tone, right? Makes sense. We don't want to pee, we don't want to poop while we're trying to run away from the bear. Then sex, the sympathetic response is responsible for ejaculation. So the parasympathetics over here. We get in the cholinergic response, right? So over here, now when we were talking over here, all of this was because epinephrine was being released, and it stimulates all of these things and all of these receptors. Now over here, acetylcholine is out there, and it's the neurotransmitter, and what it does is it will stimulate the pupils to constrict. We're resting, we can go ahead and constrict our pupils. We don't need to let all of that extra light in. So increase the salivation and tearing, right? So fluids will be increased there. And salivation, it's not just salivation, it's actually the fluid and mucus production all up through our lungs and in our intestinal juices. Well, we'll get to that. Bronchoconstricts, right? We bronchodilated here because we needed more air. We don't need more air now, so we constrict. Our system does not want to let all of the air in all the time, right? It tries to minimize the amount of air that we inhale. We don't need to inhale. We don't want to be inhaling more than what we need, because that is a great way for pathogens to get into our system, is us inhaling them. So keep the amount of air that we inhale to a minimum. Decreases your heart rate and contractile force of your heart. So your heart can get a little bit of a break there. It doesn't have to work as hard, so we're going to go ahead and take advantage of that, decrease the rate, and decrease how hard it is beating. Coronary circulation. No effect on the coronary circulation. Peripheral vessels, no effect there. We have what we call passive dilation, because over here, when all the epinephrine is being released for the sympathetic response, we get vasoconstriction. End up with dilation of the vessels just because of the lack of epinephrine as compared to during the sympathetic response. It stimulates digestion and intestinal blood flow. So while you're resting, that's when your stomach is usually going to do its gurgling, right? It increases that peristalsis and increases the release of digestive juices and all that stuff. As far as over here, what we're talking about on the sympathetic side, we increase our glucose. Now, we don't increase our glucose in the parasympathetic side, at least not directly, but if we're digesting food, we may increase our insulin in response to the ingested food. Let's see, bladder constriction. We are resting and digesting. This is a good time for us to pee, so we can end up with a constriction of the bladder muscle, the detrusor muscle, it's actually called, and the sphincter relaxes. So now you're gonna, if you got a full bladder, you're gonna feel it because it's kind of pushing down on that. Decreased anal tone. Now, you're going to be able to go. And as far as the parasympathetic side, this is responsible for the vasodilation down in the perineal area so that erection can occur.